It was a night I'll never forget, a night filled with intensity, pleasure, and more emotions than I could have ever imagined. I had always wondered what it would be like to be truly desired, to be wanted in every way a woman craves. My husband, for all his good qualities, could never give me what I needed in the bedroom. That night, he gave me a gift, one that shattered everything I thought I knew about love, trust, and desire. But what happens when satisfaction comes at a price you never intended to pay? The consequences of that night will stay with me forever, and they changed everything. Hi, I'm Sarah, a 36-year-old woman living in the vibrant city of Chicago with my husband, Greg, who's 42. We've been married for 3 years now. Greg is a kind-hearted man, a lawyer, and he's everything anyone could ask for, except in one crucial area. Our intimate life has always been, well, lacking. I've always felt something was missing, but I tried to ignore it. However, over time, the dissatisfaction grew. I complained, he tried, but nothing seemed to work. On the surface, everything seemed perfect. But in private, I felt hollow. The man I loved couldn't give me what I truly needed, and I was too afraid to confront him with the truth of my desires. Then, my birthday came around, and everything changed. It's strange how life can look so perfect on the outside but feel so empty when you're alone in the quiet moments. That's how I felt, day after day, living with Greg. On paper, everything was fine. He was a successful lawyer, kind, funny, and supportive in every way. He made me laugh, we had shared interests, and I truly loved him. But there was one part of our relationship that had become the elephant in the room, the bedroom. I know it sounds trivial to some, but it wasn't just about the physical act of intimacy. It was about feeling seen, desired, and truly cherished in a way that made me feel alive. And, despite all his efforts, Greg couldn't do that for me. It wasn't that he didn't try, it was just that he couldn't seem to get it right. The way we made love was predictable, always the same routine. We'd start in the usual missionary position, and that was it. There was no variety, no passion, and, to be honest, no connection. We rarely kissed, no teasing, no foreplay. The intimacy was mechanical, and it left me feeling hollow. At first, I tried to brush it off. I thought maybe it was just a phase. But as months went by, my frustration grew. I'd bring it up in casual conversations, but Greg would just apologize and promise to try harder. He did, but it never got better. And when he tried too hard, it felt forced, not natural. I began to dread the nights when we were supposed to be close. It wasn't just the physical disappointment, it was the emotional distance that seemed to grow with each failed attempt. I couldn't even bring myself to enjoy it anymore. I'd lie there, pretending, because I didn't want to hurt Greg's feelings. But inside, I felt abandoned. As silly as it sounds, I wanted to feel like a woman again, not just his wife. I wanted to feel wanted, desired, and truly appreciated in the way that only intimacy can provide. But Greg just couldn't do it. Every night, after the disappointment, I'd stare at the ceiling, wondering if this was my fate. Married to a man who loved me but couldn't love me in the way I needed. I wanted to confront him about it, tell him how unsatisfied I was, but I didn't want to hurt him. I knew it would crush him if he knew just how frustrated I had become. So, I kept quiet, suffering in silence, hoping that one day, he'd find a way to change. But that day never came. It was hard to admit, but I couldn't pretend anymore. As the months passed, I found myself sinking deeper into a place I never thought I would be. I started looking for attention elsewhere, little things, like flirting with men in the office or looking at those stories of passion in books or movies, all the while knowing I was betraying Greg without physically acting on it. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing from my life. I loved Greg, but I was lonely. I was starting to question if I could go on like this forever, stuck in a marriage where my heart, and my desires, were left unfulfilled. And as much as I hated to admit it, I began to wonder what it would be like if someone else could give me what Greg couldn't. It was during this period of longing that my birthday was fast approaching. I never expected it to turn into the turning point of my life. I didn't know that the man I loved, the one who always tried so hard but never quite succeeded, was about to take a desperate step that would change everything. My birthday was approaching, and I had mixed feelings about it. Greg had been hinting at a surprise, but I had grown used to his efforts to make up for our lack of intimacy in ways that felt like band-aids. We'd go out for dinner, exchange gifts, maybe even share a glass of wine, but I always had that nagging thought in the back of my mind: something was missing. I couldn't shake it off. And now, with another birthday just around the corner, I couldn't help but wonder if this year would be any different. Greg had been acting strangely, a little distant, but I couldn't quite figure out why. His usual charm seemed a bit forced, his smiles a little too tight, and there was a nervous energy about him that I hadn't seen before. I thought maybe he was just stressed with work. After all, he was a lawyer, and his job was demanding. But something in the pit of my stomach told me that there was more to it. 2 days before my birthday, he came home late, holding a bottle of wine and a small box wrapped in silver paper. He handed it to me with a sheepish grin. "Happy early birthday, babe," he said, his eyes not quite meeting mine. I smiled, curious but trying to hide the disappointment I always felt when he tried to make up for our lack of intimacy with material gestures. Still, I thanked him and opened the box. Inside was a simple, elegant necklace, a beautiful silver chain with a small diamond pendant. It was lovely, but I couldn't ignore the emptiness I felt. It was just another gift, another attempt to patch things up when the real problem lay in a much deeper place. "Thank you, it's beautiful," I said, kissing him on the cheek, hoping he didn't notice the hollow smile on my face. Later that night, he was unusually quiet. I didn't press him, though. I just assumed it was the stress of trying to plan a perfect birthday for me, despite not being able to meet my needs in the bedroom. The night before my birthday, I went to bed early, hoping for a little peace and quiet. But around midnight, I was woken up by the sound of Greg moving around in the kitchen. The smell of something cooking wafted into the room, and I could hear him murmuring to himself. I looked at the clock. It was well past midnight, and I was confused. What was going on? Why was he up so late? I decided to get up and check on him. As I stepped into the living room, I saw Greg standing by the kitchen counter, looking nervous. He smiled when he saw me. "I've got a surprise for you, Sarah," he said softly. "Something special for your birthday." I raised an eyebrow. "It's already past midnight, Greg. What are you doing?" His eyes shone with excitement, but there was something else there, something I couldn't quite place. "Don't worry," he reassured me. "It's a good surprise. I've got it all planned out. Just trust me, okay?" I stared at him, trying to read his face. What could he be planning now? It seemed a little over the top for my birthday, but I didn't want to ruin the moment. I was used to him trying to make up for our intimate struggles with gestures like this, so I nodded. "Okay," I said cautiously. "I'm curious." He gestured for me to sit on the couch, and I did, my eyes still fixed on him. He disappeared for a moment, and when he returned, he was holding a glass of wine. "Here, drink this," he said, handing it to me. "It's a special night. I want you to feel relaxed." I took the glass from him and gave it a sip. It was sweet, strong, and comforting. I didn't think much of it at the time, just thinking it was part of his plan to make me feel pampered. But what I didn't know was that the wine wasn't just for relaxation, it was part of something much bigger. As I drank, I felt my body growing warmer, the alcohol soothing my nerves and making my head spin just a little. It wasn't long before I felt drowsy, my vision blurring slightly. I could tell I was getting a bit tipsy, but I didn't think anything of it. Greg always made me drink wine when we were in the mood for something romantic, so this seemed like just another attempt to make the night special. He smiled at me, his face looking softer now. "Just relax, Sarah. Enjoy the night. It's your birthday. You deserve to feel good." Before I knew it, I was feeling dizzy, my limbs heavy. The world around me seemed to spin gently, and my eyelids grew heavier by the second. I didn't want to fight it. I trusted Greg, after all, and I thought maybe he was finally going to make this birthday unforgettable. That's when he led me upstairs. The hallway was dim, and the air was thick with a sense of anticipation. I could feel my heart beat faster, but not because I was excited. I felt something else, something unfamiliar. The air felt charged, but I couldn't put my finger on it. I wasn't sure what was happening, but I was too sleepy to protest. When we reached the bedroom, Greg gently helped me lie down on the bed. My eyes fluttered open and closed, but I was too far gone to resist anymore. I heard him moving around, but my mind was clouded, and I couldn't focus on what he was doing. And that's when I saw them. The two men. They were standing by the bed, and the sight of them took me by surprise. They were both tall, muscular, with broad shoulders, and their dark eyes gleamed in the soft light. I blinked, trying to focus, but I couldn't fully comprehend what was happening. The room seemed to spin, and I could feel my pulse quicken. "Surprise," Greg whispered softly, his voice strangely distant now. "I know you've been wanting something more, something different." I tried to say something, but the words didn't come. The wine had taken its toll. My body was numb, and my mind was hazy. Before I knew it, I felt hands on me. Strong, firm hands that were doing things to me that I had never experienced before. My heart raced as the night unfolded in a way I never expected, in a way I could never have imagined. But in that moment, I wasn't thinking about Greg. I wasn't thinking about anything but the overwhelming sensations I was feeling. The pleasure was unlike anything I'd ever known. The men, with their expert touch, knew exactly how to make me feel alive, wanted, and desired. I screamed out in pleasure, unable to control the emotions flooding through me. It felt like something had been unlocked inside me, a part of me I had forgotten about. The moments that followed felt like a blur, but they were the most vivid blur I've ever experienced. I remember the sound of my own breath, erratic and desperate, as my senses were overwhelmed. There was no turning back now. The men, they were everything Greg could never be in that moment, attentive, eager, and completely in tune with what my body needed. I could feel their hands exploring, their mouths trailing over my skin in ways that made me gasp for air, as though the very act of breathing was something foreign to me. It wasn't just physical, it was emotional, spiritual, something deeper than I had ever known. They weren't just satisfying me, they were making me feel powerful, seen, like I was the center of their world. With Greg, it was always routine, predictable and safe, but this? This was like stepping into a world of forbidden desires, and I found myself embracing it, unable to resist the pull. Their hands were everywhere, and for the first time in so long, I didn't feel alone in the experience. I felt like I was actually alive again, like my body was waking up from a long slumber. I can't recall how long it went on, but the time seemed to stretch in ways that I didn't want to end. There was no hurry, no rushed movements. Every touch, every kiss, every stroke. They were all deliberate, intended to make me feel things I hadn't known I was capable of feeling. My body responded as if it had been starved for something, craving this kind of attention, this kind of passion. It was sensual in a way that I could never have imagined with Greg. I remember gasping, my back arching, as one of the men leaned down and kissed me, his lips firm, his touch confident. The other man moved behind me, his hands gliding over my curves in a way that made my knees weak. The intensity of it all sent a shiver through my spine, and I couldn't stop the soft moans that escaped my lips. Every gasp, every breath, felt like it was the first I'd ever taken. And then it happened. I screamed, loud, uncontrollable, as the sensations coursed through me. My entire body trembled under their touch. I had no idea how I was supposed to handle it. I had never felt anything like it before. It was everything I had been missing in my marriage, everything I had longed for but was too afraid to ask for. There was no shame, no hesitation. The pleasure was so intense, so raw, that it swept me away. It was like I was someone else, someone who didn't have to hold back or pretend. My body had finally been awakened to the desires it had been yearning for, and I let it take over completely. I lost track of everything, time, place, even my own thoughts. At some point, my mind drifted, only to return to the present, overwhelmed by the sensations, unable to fully grasp what was happening around me. The men continued to move in perfect harmony, their touches unrelenting, their movements fluid and confident. I could feel my body responding, each stroke pushing me closer to a place I had never reached before, total surrender. I remember the heat building inside me, a pressure that I couldn't ignore. The sounds in the room, the moans, the heavy breaths, the rustling sheets, felt so surreal, so alien yet so natural. I had never been with anyone who could do this, who could make me feel so incredibly alive. The night wore on, but I felt no need for it to end. Each moment stretched into the next, each wave of pleasure washing over me, consuming me. It wasn't just about sex, it was about being seen, truly seen in a way that I never had been before. Eventually, I collapsed back onto the bed, breathless, spent, but feeling something I hadn't felt in years, satisfaction. My body hummed, still tingling from the intensity of everything that had just unfolded. But even in that moment, amidst the wave of pleasure, I couldn't help but wonder, what had just happened? I glanced around, my mind still foggy. The men were still there, looking at me, their eyes dark with desire, but there was something else in their gaze, something that made me realize they weren't just doing this for pleasure. They were giving me something that I had been searching for, something that Greg couldn't provide. And Greg? He was somewhere in the background, silent. He'd given me this gift, a gift that seemed to stretch the limits of what I thought I knew about love, about desire, and about marriage. In the deepest part of me, I wondered if I would ever be able to look at him the same way again. For the first time in what felt like forever, I felt wanted. Not just loved, not just cared for, but wanted. And that feeling? It was intoxicating. But I knew the price I'd pay for that feeling would come. I just didn't know when, or how, it would all unravel. The days that followed were a blur of confusion and guilt, but also a strange sense of fulfillment that I couldn't shake. I had gotten exactly what I'd needed, what I'd been missing, for so long. But as much as I tried to ignore it, something gnawed at me deep inside, like an itch I couldn't scratch. Greg had been his usual self after the night, trying to act as though nothing had changed. But how could I go back to pretending that everything was normal? I could no longer ignore the tension that had crept into our relationship, a subtle awareness that he had, in a way, broken something in me with his misguided attempt to fix our marriage. I could never go back to being the woman who quietly accepted the emptiness in our intimate life. And yet, there was a part of me that still loved Greg. I couldn't deny it. He was the man I had married, the man who had given me everything I could ask for in every area but one. The problem was, the one area where he couldn't satisfy me had now been filled, and by someone else. I had to find a way to reconcile these two conflicting parts of my life, the woman who still loved her husband and the one who had tasted something new, something better. Then, a few weeks later, something I hadn't expected happened. I found out I was pregnant. At first, I thought it was just a false alarm, a late period or some hormonal imbalance. But as the days passed and my symptoms became clearer, I realized the truth. I was pregnant. I was so overwhelmed that I could barely process the situation. I knew the moment I found out that the baby wasn't Greg's. My mind spun in a panic as I calculated the dates in my head, remembering the night of my birthday, the night I'd slept with those men. The timing lined up, and I knew there was no way the baby could be Greg's. But what was I supposed to do? I had no idea how to tell him. How could I tell him that the child he was about to become a father to wasn't his at all? It was the kind of secret that would destroy him, and possibly us. I spent the next few days and a daze, trying to figure out how to manage this new reality. I convinced myself that I could keep the secret, that I could hide the truth and protect Greg from the heartbreak that would follow. After all, he had been the one to give me the gift that led to this. If he hadn't made that decision, I wouldn't have gotten pregnant with someone else's child. In my mind, the blame shifted to him, even though I knew it was no one's fault but my own. I kept telling myself that everything would be fine, that I could raise the child as if it were Greg's and pretend nothing had changed. I would love the baby, just as I loved Greg, and somehow, I convinced myself that it would work. But the truth always has a way of coming out, no matter how much we try to bury it. Several months passed, and by the time I was deep into my pregnancy, the guilt began to weigh on me heavily. Every time I saw Greg's face, every time he smiled at me with that trusting look, I felt like I was carrying a burden that was crushing me. He was so excited about becoming a father, so hopeful, so unaware of the truth. It was breaking me from the inside out. Then, one day, it happened. I went for an ultrasound, and it all became even more real. The doctor confirmed my pregnancy, and as they showed me the baby on the screen, I couldn't help but think about how I was going to tell Greg. How would I explain it? How would I face him? The moment I walked into our living room that evening, Greg was sitting on the couch, a look of excitement in his eyes as he eagerly asked how the appointment went. He had no idea. It went well, I said, my voice shaking. The baby's healthy. Greg smiled, his eyes lighting up. I'm so excited, Sarah. I can't believe we're going to be parents. I tried to hold it together, but the tears welled up in my eyes. I couldn't look at him, couldn't bear to face the lie I was living. Sarah? What's wrong? His voice was filled with concern, but I couldn't find the words to tell him the truth. I had to do something. The weight of the lie was unbearable, but I didn't know if I could ever bring myself to confess. Weeks turned into a month, and then a few more, until I couldn't keep up the charade any longer. One night, as we lay in bed, I knew it was time. The guilt, the shame, the pain of deceiving him, it was too much. I turned to Greg, my heart pounding. Greg, there's something I need to tell you, I began, my voice trembling. He turned to face me, his eyes full of concern. What's wrong, Sarah? I took a deep breath, knowing this was the moment everything would change. The baby isn't yours. His expression froze, confusion flashing across his face. What do you mean? Sarah, how could it not be mine? I closed my eyes, unable to face him. I slept with 2 men on my birthday. You arranged it. And now I'm pregnant. But it's not yours. The silence that followed was deafening. My heart was racing, my chest tight as if I couldn't breathe. Greg stared at me, his face drained of color. What? He whispered, his voice barely audible. How could you? Why didn't you tell me sooner? I didn't know how, I choked out, my tears falling freely now. I didn't know how to tell you that the one thing you couldn't give me, someone else did. The truth was out, and everything had changed. The man I had tried so hard to protect, the man I loved, now knew the darkest secret I'd ever kept from him. And in that moment, I knew I had shattered everything. But what hurt more was the realization that this was no longer just about me. It was about the consequences of our actions, the trust that was broken, the love that was shattered, and the future that now seemed uncertain. There was no going back. And I didn't know if we could ever recover from this. The days after I told Greg the truth were some of the hardest of my life. The silence between us was suffocating. He didn't yell, didn't throw things, but the hurt in his eyes spoke volumes. He was devastated, not just by the betrayal, but by the realization that the life we'd built together was built on a foundation of lies. For the first time in our relationship, I saw the cracks, and they were deep. I tried to comfort him, to explain how I had been feeling for so long, how desperate I had been for something more. But no words could undo the damage. Greg had always been a man of reason, of logic, but this? This was emotional. It cut to the core of who we were, who we'd been to each other. And I could see that the man I had loved was slipping away, slowly, piece by piece. He didn't say much after that night, and I couldn't blame him. What could I say? How could I justify my actions when I knew there was no justification that could ever make it right? I had betrayed the one person who had always been there for me, and for what? To feel wanted for a night? To feel seen in a way I had been craving for so long? It was hard to look at him without feeling ashamed. The man I had married, the man who had tried so hard to please me, to make things work, now sat before me, a shadow of the person I had once known. I knew that the damage wasn't just to him, it was to both of us. Our trust, the very thing that held us together, had been shattered in an instant. I remember days of silence, of avoidance. We couldn't look each other in the eyes for more than a few seconds without the guilt weighing heavy on my chest. Every word felt like a lie, every smile like a mask I couldn't keep up. And then came the revelation I had been dreading. The truth about the baby. It wasn't just that I had cheated, it was that the child I was carrying wasn't his. Greg, who had been so eager, so excited about becoming a father, now had to face the fact that the life we were going to build together would be entirely different from what we had planned. I remember the night I sat him down to tell him the final truth about the pregnancy. I could see the anger in his eyes, but more than that, I saw the pain. The tears that followed were not just from the betrayal, but from the realization that his entire future had been thrown into uncertainty. The future he thought we had was no longer his. It was mine, and now, it would be the child's. I had no idea how things would turn out. I didn't know if we could move past this, or if I could even forgive myself. The shame was overwhelming. The life I thought I'd carefully built had unraveled, and I couldn't see a way to repair it. How could I ask for forgiveness when I didn't even understand the depth of my own actions? How could I expect Greg to forgive me when I couldn't forgive myself? Days turned into weeks, and as the pregnancy continued, so did the weight of my decision. I tried to keep my distance from Greg, unsure of how to navigate this new, painful chapter in our lives. I knew that I had lost him, that much was clear, but what hurt even more was that I had lost myself in the process. I tried to focus on the baby, to convince myself that I could make things right, but deep down, I knew the truth. There was no way to undo what I had done. The intimacy I had shared with those men, the betrayal I had inflicted on Greg, it would always be part of my story. It would always be the dark part of my past. The months passed, and things didn't get better. They didn't get worse either, but the tension was always there, an unspoken cloud that loomed over us. Greg kept his distance, no longer the man I had married. He was a shell of the man I had once known, someone who had trusted me, who had loved me. But now, that love was tainted, and the trust that had once held us together was gone. I spent many nights crying alone, wondering if there was a way to fix things. Could we rebuild? Could we start over? Could I ever be the woman he needed me to be again? And the answer, I realized, was that I didn't know. I had no idea what the future would look like, and maybe that was the hardest part to accept. I thought about the men who had made me feel alive, who had given me the kind of pleasure that I had been missing. They were a temporary escape, a brief moment in time that I would always look back on, but the consequences of that night, of those choices, were permanent. I couldn't go back to the woman I was before, but I also didn't know how to move forward from here. As the baby grew inside me, I knew one thing for certain, there would be no going back. There would be no erasing the past, no undoing the hurt. But there was also the possibility of moving forward. I had no idea what that would look like, but I had to live with the choices I made and learn to accept the consequences. It wasn't easy, and it didn't happen overnight, but somewhere in the chaos, I knew that the most important thing I could do now was find a way to heal. Whether or not Greg and I could heal together, only time would tell. But I knew, deep down, that whatever came next, I had to take responsibility for the life I had created, for the choices I had made, and for the woman I was becoming. The consequences had already been set into motion, and all I could do now was face them head-on. As the days passed, the weight of my decisions grew heavier. I watched Greg, knowing the distance between us was irreparable. Every moment with him felt strained, the tension thick in the air. I had no idea what would happen next. Could we ever return to the way things were? Could he ever forgive me? Could I ever forgive myself? And then, just as I was starting to think that everything was lost, I received a message that could change everything. I opened it, my heart pounding in my chest, unsure of what I was about to read. The message was from one of the men I had slept with that night. What he said next would shatter everything I thought I knew about myself, my marriage, and the life I thought I was building. And I could already feel the storm brewing. Thank you so much for watching. I truly appreciate all your support and I'm so glad you're part of this community. If you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to hit that like button, it really helps me out. I'd love to hear your thoughts, so drop a comment below and share your ideas with me. If you think this video could help someone else, make sure to share it with your friends and family. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel and click the notification bell to stay updated with all my future videos. Make sure the notifications are set to all so you never miss out on new content. Thank you again for your support, and I can't wait to see you in the next video.